PricewaterhouseCoopers, Atlanta Gas Lights, AIG, and our very own Atlanta Braves. So she brings a very unique set of background, skill set, and experience on various topics for her clients and prospects. We are excited to hear her speak on change today. So thank you, Jackie, for joining us.
Thank you for that great introduction, Sabine. I really appreciate it. And I'm so glad to be here with you all today to talk about change. Unless you have been under a rock for maybe the last 18 months, you probably haven't had to deal with change, right? But I'm sure everyone has had to make some type of pivot within their business. And most likely you're probably about to make some type of pivot thanks to the CDC last week, right? One thing I can say, our government does not do change very well, do they? They really could have used change management for that one, but they have a history of that. Do you remember a couple of years ago when we had the terrorist threats and you had the red, yellow, green, and it looked like a prop from Sesame Street, right? So our government just isn't really good with change. But the thing is, many companies aren't either. What was that? 70% of change at companies fail. I see it all the time. I see it constantly. And I would love to say that at 5 years old in kindergarten, I said I wanted to be a change specialist. I would love to say that's what I majored in college. No, it was accounting. I would love to say that was my first job coming out of college. No, it wasn't. Change management fell in my lap. That's because many times I would work on projects as a project manager, and people would say things like, oh, that project was horrible. And I'm like, no, we did exactly what we were asked to do. Or the other favorite, our company doesn't do change very well. I hear that all the time. We don't do change very well. We're adverse to change. And then one of my favorites, we don't talk about change because it upsets the employees. You may not talk about it, but they're talking about it. So those are things that we commonly hear in the change industry. The first project that I worked on that really included change was a process project to streamline back office operations. I was working with Atlanta Gas Light at the time, and I would have many employees that would love to tell me, I've done this job longer than you've been alive. Loved it. How can you argue with that? You know it all, right? And they were very adverse to change. And it was a very hard project. But I learned a lot of things that took me into my next project, my next company, AIG. AIG had the great idea of saying, how can we do Geico for planes? There's millions of plane owners throughout the country. There's millions of airports, and what's classified as an airport may not be what you see at Hartsfield Jackson. It may be a landing strip in someone's backyard or something for a crop duster. But they were trying to figure out how they could do Geico for planes. Well, the problem is upper management had all these great ideas, and we pulled in consultants. We had a censure that we were just shoveling money out the door to every month. We had other consultants that, we just opened the windows on Water Street and let the money just flow out. And we had lots of consultants shoveling it up just as quickly. At that point, the government had told us that we were too big to fail. We weren't going to fail. And so you had all the confidence in the world to do whatever. And so the number 7 project was a project to create Geico for planes. The problem is when I stepped in, they were a year behind schedule, $10 million off budget, and had nothing to show for it. Well, I would love to say that the reason was, it was technical. The reason was, it was just too hard. No, the reason was there was never a communication on the project. There was never any communication to employees on what they were doing. They just knew that they were being shoved into a room for a couple of hours a day and everything was being pulled out of their heads. Now, if you're not talking to your employees about why they're doing something, they come up with their own reasons on why they're doing it. And the one reason that things usually circle back to, you're trying to get rid of me. You're trying to get rid of me. If they have Geico for planes, they don't need me as an underwriter. I'm not going to tell them everything I know. And that's what had went on for a year. The requirements were horrible. And everyone was chugging along like there is nothing. This is just going to be impossible. We just don't do change well. This is just too big. I don't know how we can fix it. Well, the first thing to fix it is let's communicate. One thing I tell people, when you're doing change is always thought of as kind of the after thing. We'll worry about change management towards the end when we have to communicate to employees that it's going to happen in the next few months or they have to go through training. If you really want to be a champion of change, if your company wants to get it right, change management comes in the front end and communication comes in that front end. Where I love to see it, if you're selecting a product, if you are selecting a new system, have employees have input at that point. That is a great way to get them involved. Even if you don't go with their recommendations, they've had a say. They have some idea of what's going to be changing. Because getting past that employee, you're getting rid of me, is the hardest challenge a company can get over. And that's where a lot of change fails. Whenever you're doing things to process improve or to automate, people automatically go to you're getting rid of me. You're not communicating to those employees consistently and constantly, their minds are going to go off and they're going to have their own thoughts about what's happening. So over the years, everyone does change. I've done change with banks. I've done change with insurance companies. I've done change with a baseball team. You're probably thinking like, what could a baseball team do with change? Well, a baseball team is still a business. They still have financial systems. They still have HR systems. And guess what? They have a ton of employees, especially at the height of their season. And they probably have the most varied employee group you will ever see. You have people that still have flip phones. You have people that have no phones. And I'm telling them they have to clock in on their phone. What do you do to account for that? No one accounted for that. But guess what? Change management accounts for that. Change management can make those things work. So when you think about change management, like I said, there are several things that can make things go wrong. They can make things go the opposite way that you intended. And I have seen very large companies pull out of change 3, 5 years into it. Why is that? Everything stems from a lack of communication. Your upper management may know about it, but not share it. I just actually had a conversation with a company last week, very, very large company. And they said, we don't do change well. We really aren't communicating too much to the employees because they get really antsy with it. Okay, you're in the middle of design and you're not communicating to your employees about what's going on. The thoughts are running rampant. I promise you, they are running rampant. So you have to communicate. You have to communicate. You have to communicate to your fellow upper management. You have to communicate to your stakeholders. Let's talk about a change that we've seen go really wrong over the last week. The CDC changing the mask mandate. I'm sorry, that was the worst change ever. And when your fellow champions, your fellow stakeholders, your fellow partners are on TV saying, I had no clue they were going to do that. That is the one consistent message that has gone out over the week. And that was the wrong message. You have to communicate if you want it to be effective. You have to communicate what the goals are. You have to communicate the goals. I had a client recently, and I was brought on for change management for the last 3 months. And it was a system change. They were moving to a whole new system. And they had 350 users in the previous system. So to them, they thought it would be a success if those 350 users logged in during the first week. First week, we only had 50 users log in. Oh my gosh, that didn't go off well at all. Oh my gosh, it was horrible. What happened? And I was kind of like, what happened? After doing some investigations, I realized that the way the system had been set up, the culture and the process that went along with it, not all employees in that department would log into the system. It was a legal matter system that housed all their information for contests anytime they were sued, and they ran a lot of contests. Well, they thought everyone would log in. The majority of their employees were lawyers around the world. So you had maybe about 200 of those folks were lawyers. And then the rest were admins, assistants, paralegals. Guess what? In the typical world of a lawyer, the paralegal does that work. The assistant does that work. So those 50 was actually about right on target because those were always the folks that did the work. 350 people were not going to log into the system. 350 people had never logged into the previous system. And they thought that everything was going wrong. But the problem is they didn't have realistic expectations and goals. The goal was to move to this new system. It was not to change the way they worked. That was not the goal. But someone had that expectation. So to him, the project didn't work. But the project worked according to the goals that were established. So you have to have realistic expectations. The other thing that you want to do, you have to learn to play your part. Well, what's playing my part? Upper management, of course, always has the yay, 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 we're going to do this change and it's going to go off well. That next level, yay, yay, it's going to go off well. The next level, yay. Next level, why am I stuck doing this? Why? Because you haven't had that consistent communication and you haven't been constant with it. Everyone needs to understand what's in it for me. Every employee automatically looks at what's in it for me. You have to keep that constant and you have to communicate that consistently at all levels. How does it impact you? One thing I always tell employees, especially with automation, is that it does not necessarily mean that your job is gone, but it does mean that your job probably will change. I can say where I've seen a lot of automation implemented, sometimes it creates more jobs because then you need experts to get the data. You need experts that know how to read the data. It just transforms your job into something different and probably creates more opportunity. So please do not look at change as, oh gosh, my job is going away. No, your job is probably going to change. That's what's going to happen. But the problem is a lot of times companies don't know, so they don't say anything. And everyone sits there while all this change is going on, getting rid of me. They're writing their resumes. They're spending their time instead of going through training on LinkedIn. Not necessarily a bad thing, but they're always doing other things instead of concentrating on the change. They're also trying to figure out how they can work around it. Because wouldn't it be a great story of, yeah, they implemented this $85 million system, but I still do exactly what I did. Hasn't made any difference in my job. We see that quite often. What's in it for me? You have to have messaging that centers on what's in it for me. And then something else, you have to, like I said, play your part. And part of your part is understanding what the change is. Be a champion for change. Get your employees to be champions. One of the first things that we like to do is establish what we call change agent networks. What is that? They're influential employees within the organization. When I say influential, it doesn't necessarily mean a director, doesn't necessarily mean a CEO. A lot of times, who's that person? Maybe the admin for the department. Why? Because everyone talks to her. She knows the gossip. She knows what's going on. She knows the comings and goings. She knows how everyone feels. And most times they don't have a problem speaking up about it. Those are my best change agents. Because why? They want to be in the know. They want to have that, guess what I heard? They always want to be the bearer of good news. So they will love it. So those are some different things that you can do within your business to help with change. Make sure that you are communicating consistently and make sure you're doing it constantly. Make sure that you're playing your part. Make sure you understand the change. And then most importantly, you're setting realistic expectations. Thank you.
That was outstanding. For somebody who I like change, I thought you just did an outstanding job. Yes. But I need to back up and let anybody else ask some questions because we're all changing. I think, Don, you got one?
Not necessarily a question, but it was like you said, it was outstanding, and just to hear the points, because a lot of what you were talking about is I've been in the corporate life. You see that during the change management. I always became the person that they came to, like, do I need to look for a job? Do I need to do this? It's kind of like, no, this is to make your life easier. There's other things we need you doing. That we can automate it. We don't need you doing this manual task. We need you to be contributing to the bottom line, and necessarily collecting this piece of data is not the best way to do that. So, but the communication is the key part of it. If you don't communicate well, then you're sunk.
Very much.
And just like you said, communicate at the beginning when you implement the change. Communicate the why, and then keep everybody up to date. So I feel very strongly about that. And actually, we've seen it in this pandemic. We've translated a lot of videos of CEOs addressing their global workforce, talking about what does it mean, how does it affect us, what's the change.
Jacquulyn, that's really good in terms of when you spoke about communication. But one thing from what I've seen with change is how do you get employees to buy in? Because that's a big part. It's a big part of it. The idea is you can make all the changes, but getting them to buy in, that's when it's going to be effective. So do you have some strategies of how you can get them to buy?
Change agent network. That's the first one. Get different folks throughout the organization. Don't just look at your high level managers or your directors. Get, like I said, get an accountant. One, get someone that is within that organization, is open, is listening. Get them. The other thing too, make sure they understand what's in it for me. You always have to communicate from that level. What's in it for me?
Yeah.
So true.
Hey, Jacqulyn, I love the concept of empowering change agents to help. How do you identify them and sort of disperse them through the organization?
What you do is you have to put your ear to the ground a little bit. When you come into an organization, who's that first person that greets you? Who is that first person that takes you in and introduces you to everyone? Who's that first person that gives you the coffee and gives you a little bit of the tea with the coffee? Who is that person? I guarantee you that's going to be your best change agent. They make it their point to know everything. They make it their point to be in the know of everything. And a lot of times they're probably more influential than any director could ever be. They're the ones that organize the bagels. They're the ones that organize those type of things. They're great change agents.
And Jacqulyn, do you look for only internal people for the change?
Well, it depends on how big of a change that's impacting your partners. So for example, if you're implementing a financial system and you have, let's say, your vendors, you're going to have to reach out to your vendors and communicate, this is what's happening. Give them a timeline. Let them know, are dates changing when things are due? What exactly is going to change with it? You have to make sure that you're keeping all of your stakeholders, and you have to identify them up front. It's horrible when you miss a stakeholder and you did all this change and they know nothing about it. So identifying those stakeholders from the beginning who are going to have some type of impact from the change, and communicating once again constantly. We do communications both internal and external, because many times our external partners need to know what's going on also.
So I see that John joined us today. And I'm curious because as in the IT world, everything's fine if you just leave me alone. But you keep making changes. And granted, Colonial Pipeline needed somebody to make some changes, but didn't. So I'm curious from an IT point of view, you always have to be making changes.
Yeah, so especially, I'll describe IT, to customers, it's like a garden. Like you're never really done. You don't have to make big changes all the time, but you're always out there doing something, and the seasons change, and you'll respond to the seasons, not just what you want to put out there. So your backyard garden's got what you want to plant, but the temperature, the time of year, like you're responding to that too. And that's how we need to think about IT. We need to be doing the little things all the time, not necessarily the big things. So yeah, change is huge for us. We're always inviting customers to think about change, and especially new ones. We're inviting them for usually a big change. If I'm selling a customer, I'm saying change your IT services provider. That's a horrible proposition to somebody. What a pain. And so that you're already behind the 8 ball, and you got to show them, make it relevant to them. Say, like, identify the pain that you're trying to get at, and then that's what's in it for them, and then how do you approach their fear. So
they have a gas station or Taco Bell.
They have a fear of that change, and you got to identify it, and you got to get it on the table so that you can look at it and you can work it. If they're hesitant about something, I want to identify what it is. Why are we not doing this? Is it money? Great. Well, let's identify that. If it's just don't want to, time commitment, it could be anything. So I always try to just get at what it is and get everybody talking about it.
All right. We've got time for one more comment or question about how right Jacqulyn is.
I think.
Go ahead, Leslie.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I have a quick story that basically is a good example of, I bet, what she's dealt with. So I met a lady who was a farmer that had you pick at strawberries and blueberries in North Carolina. And last year, it was already tanking for, like, nobody was coming to the farm to do anything because they were all in lockdown. So she pulled her team together and she showed them her financials for this year versus last year. And she said, we're growing flowers now. Everybody find the fastest growing flowers we could possibly grow. They already had some. We have markets at farmers markets that will still take our stuff, but our drive-through and family tour is now parents and their kids picking flowers and paying us to do that. So she basically shifted, you know, what business they're in even. We're now a flower you picket farm because we can't survive in a fruit you picket farm and get any revenue this year, ready, go. And when the rest of the team saw the difference, you know, they got on board quickly because they felt the pain of, we're going to lose our job if we don't help her.
Wow. Wow. Jared, did you have one more comment before we wrap up?
I thought she made such a good point of how key communication up front is. I mean, we all think change management. We think of Office Space, you know, the guy that comes in and says, what would you say you do here? So I thought that was great. I learned a lot about it. Thank you.
I think the way I looked at it, Jacquulyn, it was intentional. There's some people who trip over change and it works, but you were very intentional, and I think we all picked up from that. Before we wrap up, or as we wrap up, two things. One is Jared once again came up with keeping us funny, and Jacquulyn actually alluded to this about we've always done it that way. So, yay, koala bear. Next week, Kelsey will be back with some real life stories about workplace bias. Really fascinating conversation. If you've got a friend who's involved with a mid-sized company, just the concept of workplace bias and how unintentional it may be, but how real it is. Real good conversation for next week. After the Memorial Day weekend, we're taking that week off, but then after that, creating content that converts. It's great that you can put out content, but the key is that it's converting to what you want it to do. And then Laurie's going to be discussing another option for another use of video in the business world. So thank you all. Great conversation. Sabine, thank you so much for finding Jacquulyn, or being found by Jacquulyn, but whatever it is, you guys are great. So thank you much. And everybody's input, really much enjoyed it. So y'all have a great week.
Thank
See
you.
everybody.
Thank you, Jacquulyn. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.